Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade. This is the Education Show, and I'm happy to be here today with Danyela Souza Egorov. Daniela, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have seen your name, your byline, and your commentary about education, New York, particularly all over the place lately. But for people who might not know who you are and what you do, can you give us the two-sentence version of what you're up to these days?
Yes, sure. Well, these days I am a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. I have a Substack called Families for New York. I am a parent in New York City, so I really focus in New York for, as I joke, very selfish reasons because I have kids in the public schools here. And but most of my career was actually in charter school advocacy. I work a little bit in the district and saw a charter school taking over one of the worst performing middle schools in Boston public schools, and really saw them transform that place and became like one of the highest performing schools in the city. And so I was like, well, that is working, so I should put my energy in that area. And then work with charter schools in New York, in California, and in a lot of other states. And then ran for office. I was one of those very angry moms who were not happy about what happened during COVID, and ran for office. And that's what really got me into writing, because I was very frustrated with the coverage of public schools during COVID. And now most of my time is actually writing.
Excellent. So I see you in City Journal. I see you
Yep.
in the Fordham Institute's flypaper, the
Yep.
New York Sun. Who else do you write for? And is writing now your day job? Does writing help pay the rent, or do you have a day job and you just write on the side? In which case, you must never sleep.
No, no. I sleep little because I also have kids, and so half of my time I'm with my kids, and then but half of my time I am, writing. So that is my day job, and I'm just so grateful for the Manhattan Institute for giving me this opportunity. Now, mostly of my stuff is on it's on the City Journal, and I have done a few reports for the Manhattan Institute, and there are a few more coming this year. In the process of finishing them. And but yes, I've written for the New York Post as well. And yes, it's very hard sometimes to place your writing, when you don't have like a home, like now I have the City Journal. So I'm very grateful that now I have to spend less time trying to pitch, and I just can think about what I write, and they are generous enough to then place it.
I want to talk more about placement and stories. But before we get into that, what are the issues that most concern you that you end up most writing about or reading about when it comes to education? What are the top issues for you?
Yes. So I really have one top issue, which is the disconnection between spending and results in New York, particularly in New York City. So New York State and New York City is the number one in funding for a school. New York City now it's going to spend more than $42,000 per child this
Right,
year.
right.
We're by far number one across the country. We're not number one in results for children.
Right.
And so trying to understand this connection, and this, I always say it's a conundrum because the budget has been growing so much. If you look at the last 10 years, in the last 7 years, the budget of New York City Department of Education has grown by $1 billion every year.
Wow.
They have fewer and fewer students. During the same time, during the last 8 years, they lost. No, during the last 6 years, they lost 8% K-12 students. So they have more money. They have fewer kids to educate, and we haven't seen any results. We don't have schools that are doing a better job educating our kids. The schools are not getting safer. The facilities are not getting better. So it's really this disconnection between spending and results. It's most of what I spend my time.
And when you look out at the journalism that's being produced, traditional journalists, non-traditional journalists, what's your take on the quality and the quantity of coverage of these important issues?
So I think the main problem we have is in terms of quantity, because New York City Department of Education represents 40% of the budget of the city. And if you look at the last election campaign for mayor, education was a side note. and it's literally the largest job you can say that the mayor is going to spend is managing the $40 billion of the Department of Education. Even though our current mayor said he would not manage because he would give up mayoral control, but then the first day he went back, which I think was a great decision on his part. But like, what then? If journalists are not asking at least, like, let's say 1/4 of their questions about education, like, they're not doing their job. And there was very little talked about public education. When there was talk, was about what I think are issues that impact a tiny number of students. For example, gifted and talent and SHSAT, which are the specialized high schools in New York City.
Right.
These are like maybe 5% of students in New York City. And these are the students that are in high performing, high demand schools.
Right.
So, and most of the discussion is in this area. So we have very little journalism about education in New York. And when we have are about literally like side issues and allegedly the parents who are actually very happy with New York City public schools. And there is no discussion about the 50% of kids who cannot read or do math at grade level. There is no discussion about the schools that are losing tremendous number of students. So yeah, that's my biggest frustration with coverage here in New York.
And what's your sense of why that is? Because this is far from a news desert. They're education reporters at public radio, at the cable television news outlets, obviously the New York Times, the Post, the Daily News. There's a chalk beat here. There's no shortage of journalists, but you're telling me, if I understand correctly, that you feel like there's not enough coverage and it's not of the most important topics. What's your sense? Are there other folks out there besides the ones I just named who are working on this besides yourself? And what's your sense of why the coverage is so little and so misdirected?
Yes. So I think education, it doesn't really make headlines, right? It's I think, for example, like crime, if there is a big thing that happened, like a murder, something yesterday, it will be the cover next day, right? And in education, it's harder. Like you have, of course, when you get a state test, when you have the NAEP scores, but it's much more of a daily grind. And so it doesn't really make headlines. I do think the New York Post does a good job, and they do a lot of this coverage that I'm talking about, like the costs and the lack of results. But I haven't seen a lot of journalists asking questions about the mayoral candidates about this. There's nobody has been asking, what is your plan about the increasing budget and no results? Like this, the candidates spoke very little, but also they were not asked about that. And I think that we need to do a much better job is asking the candidates, like, how do you plan to address this, which is a huge, expensive problem in our city? Now I am happy that there's more coverage of the class size law, which is, again, a huge increase in expense. So there is a new law that was passed that has reduced the class sizes across the board in New York City. We're now at 65% of implementation. So 65% of classrooms are compliant with the law. It's a super expensive law. It's going to cost an incredible amount of money, not only for hiring teachers, but also to create the space, because the reality is that the schools the majority of schools that have really high class sizes are really in high demand. And so every single classroom in that building has been used. And so it's going to be extremely difficult to implement this law really across the board. And I have seen a lot more coverage about that. And I think good coverage, like saying, there might be benefits to reducing class size, but at which cost? And also, like, there's some very difficult choices that the district is going to have to do if they are actually going to go all the way 100%.
Right. And we also get back to this issue of outcomes. There have been class size reduction initiatives in other states. There was a national class size reduction at one effort at one point, and the results are always a question. Before we move on, I wanted to ask a little bit. First of all, I wanted to ask the name or the names of the journalists at the Post who you say are doing a good job. Are those education reporters, or are they City Hall reporters?
So Susan Edelman I think she's focused mostly on education. Carl Campanile always has good coverage of education as well. I think the editorial board at the Post really focus a lot on education. So I think they do a great job. I gotta give a heads up to the City Journal. They have done so much on education. Sometimes I'm even like, oh my gosh, are they going to publish this again this week? And they do. So I am really happy to help increase the coverage of education at the City Journal as well.
And are there, in addition to yourself, are there other non-traditional, informal, but important sources of information, bloggers, Substackers, YouTubers? Are there other folks? Maybe they don't have a City Journal presence, but having a presence online, sharing information and digging up new facts, which is what journalism is.
Yes. So there's a new podcast by some fellow parent activists, and it's called Schooled, and it's some of the founders of this organization called Place that advocate for accelerated education in New York City. They have a really good podcast, and they are parents themselves in New York City public schools, but also they have been doing this work. They serving community education councils, which is our equivalent of school boards here. They are very involved with education policy, and I think they're doing a really great job with the school podcast.
Speaking of podcasts, in other cities, there's either a journalist or someone else who goes to the school board meetings and reports from them or does a recap or something like that, because most parents and most people can't sit through.
Don't have time.
Is there someone who covers the school board, the New York City school board meetings effectively in that way?
I'm not aware of anybody who goes that would be a good job. I would do it if I have time. The PEP meetings. So here's the panel of education policy.
Right.
I think Chalkbeat sometimes have some good stuff about what happened. I see that I see some articles where they went through the minutes of the PEP meetings.
Right.
So I don't know if they go every single month, but yeah, that would be a good work if somebody had the time and the patience, because these meetings tend to be very long.
What about all the other people? You mentioned Chalkbeat. They've got 3 or 4 reporters covering New York City schools. WNYC, Gothamist has a reporter. New York One has a reporter. The New York Times has a Metro education reporter. What do you see from them in terms of covering important education issues?
I think the New York Times has had so much on Gifted and Talented and how these schools are racially segregated. I mean, that has been their main point of coverage for some time. I think now they have done some good stuff on the class size law, for example, just last week. Mm-hmm. I don't see a lot of coverage there about, again, what I think is the main issue, which is we have put all this money in our schools. What are we getting for, right? And then, yes, I don't see a lot of this type of coverage in the other vehicles that you mentioned.
Yeah. I'm curious in particular.
But look, I don't want to claim that I read everything.
No one sees everything.
I might be making a mistake, and I'll be happy to be corrected.
Well, I'm curious about this. I've written and commissioned pieces about the coverage of schools in New York City in the past, and I've always noticed that there's a lot of human beings, relatively speaking, to other cities, covering schools, but not always the praise. The people who watch the coverage are sometimes critical of the coverage, as you're being, in a constructive way. And Chalkbeat, of course, has the biggest newsroom dedicated to covering the schools. And I can't help but want more from it, or maybe different from it than sometimes I get.
Yes, I agree. I mean, look, I think that we all might have also different interests, right? I think that is my main interest, so that is my criticism. But uh, there are other people who might tell you that there are different problems in New York City public schools. So, yeah.
The issue of school choice is an issue that I have been thinking about and asking journalists and interested people about, because it's such a big issue these days in
Yeah.
many states and nationally now, and also because it's such a difficult issue to cover from a journalistic perspective. Do you have any thoughts on how school choice fits into this issue of the disconnect between the money and the results? Is there anyone out there who's doing a good job covering school choice?
So I am very curious. I'm so excited, first of all, about the expansion of school choice across the country. I really think that it's so important to give choice to families, and particularly, I think even the states that don't have universal school choice, but they are focusing on low-income families or families who have kids enrolled in underperforming schools, right? There are some programs that are more target, or if you have a child with who requires special education, so then you have priority. So I'm very excited about this. I think that it's there is this wrong narrative that the states that are expanding school choice are doing at the expense of public school dollars, which I wrote about this at City Journal. If you look at the red states that have expanded school choice, they have also at the same time done huge investments in their public schools. So, for example, the bill that Texas just passed last year, that everybody covered how they created the SA. Nobody covered how they put a ton of money in their public schools, and they promised to hold harmless every public school that lose students. They're not going to take money away if you lose students. So it's really a combination, I think, of these states making big investments in their public schools and at the same time expanding choice, which I think it's, if your budget allows, that probably would not be possible in New York City. But if your budget, and we have already invested a lot of money, but if your budget allows, I think it's the perfect combination, because you are putting pressure on the districts to not lose the students, like just in terms of, you need, like people are going to leave if you don't do a good job,
Right.
because they now have a choice. But
Right.
at the same time, they are making some very smart investments as well. And I think where we are seeing actual academic results for kids are in these states, right? Even though I think it's Mississippi the one that they have not had so much choice yet, but they are now really trying to expand. So.
And is there anyone besides you who's reporting on choice in a way that doesn't perpetuate this misperception about taking money away? Is there anyone else out there, an outlet or a journalist or a non-journalist, who seems to see the situation the same way you see it?
That's a good question. I don't follow so much well, I read everything that EdChoice puts. They put more like reports. It's not really journalism in that sense, but they have such great database that I usually read a lot of their stuff. Robert Pondiscio, I think, is writing a lot about, the curriculum reforms, which is his thing. And I really, I'm such a fan of his coverage. I think he is always trying to help us focus on what's happening on the classroom. Mm-hmm. But yes, I'm sure there are local coverage. I mean, I'm not reading everything about like Texas Press about their bills, but I do think that the Wall Street Journal has had some good reporting on that as well, and on their op-ed, their editorial page as well.
speaking of choice and the spread of choice, I know, and I'm sure you know, that the Democratic governor in Colorado recently announced that Colorado would participate in the program. What do you think is going to happen here in New York with Governor Hochul? Do you think that New York is going to participate, or no way?
I really hope she will participate. She might make the decision after the election. She has a track record of making tough decisions after the election,
Uh-huh.
so we might have to wait after November
Right.
4th. But look, it's a very clear case. New York and California they are in the top three states with the largest amount of federal taxes paid to the federal government. New Yorkers and Californians will donate to this program.
Yeah.
A lot of money is going to leave our state because of these donations. And if we don't opt in, this money is going to benefit low-income kids in other states. So I have friends in Idaho, in Iowa, and Ohio who are like, I hope you guys don't opt in because it's more money coming to us, you know. But I think it's going to be politically impossible to explain to New Yorkers and to Californians how you stayed out of this program if you are contributing so much to this program. I think that they have a lot of pressure for teachers unions, and with declining enrollment in our state, I think there's a lot of pressure on Governor Kathy Hochul to not opt in. But I think again, and I will make sure, you know, to help to make sure that she's held accountable if she doesn't opt in, because we're going to see how much money New Yorkers donate to this program, and then we're going to see the benefits in other states.
When you talk to your fellow parents, or when readers write to you, or people you talk to in other settings who don't understand or think the way you do about choice, what do they say, and how do you respond to them? Because there are a lot of people who are suspicious of or critical of private school choice.
Yes. So the main thing that I hear is that there are so many parents who have still no idea that this revolution in education is happening across the country, right? People are like, wait, so if I move to Florida, am I just going to get a voucher and I get an ESA and like I can just choose whatever school I want for my kids? And I'm like, yes, that has been the reality there for a long time. And then you can see people like making the calculation, you know, wait, if I can keep my job and if I can like pay no state taxes, and then I can just choose this, like, you can see people like, wow, like you just open an option for me that I was not aware. So I think a lot of my job when I am talking to parent groups is just saying, this is happening. There is now like 50% of kids across the country who are eligible to, who have access to, well, access I wouldn't say, because they might be in a rural district and they don't have a school option, but they are eligible to school choice, right? Mm-hmm. There is a lot of, the main pushback that I get particularly from parents in New York is like, I don't want to subsidize rich people, right? So there's a lot of people who say, I agree with this, but it should be only for low income students. And my conversation is always, and look, I also struggle with this. I think if I had my preference, it would be more for low-income families or families who have disabilities who really are struggling, or if your kid is enrolled in an underperforming school, right. Of course, that should be our priority. But my struggle is that when you have these programs that only serve low-income students, like we had in Chicago, like we had in Washington, D.C., it's so easy to cut them. It's so easy to eliminate them. And they have been eliminated both in D.C. and in Chicago. And so if we need to find a way to create these programs and make them sustainable and make them durable. And I think the best way is to make them universal, because then you have everybody is invested in and everybody can participate, and then it will be much harder to eliminate them than if they are only serving, you know, low-income families who might not have so much ways to put political pressure.
That's the challenge.
That is the challenge.
Let me ask you to reflect on a couple of things related to journalism, related to writing for the public, which you do and I do and so many others do now. You've been at this a little while, and I'm curious whether you've learned any lessons or had to adjust or respond to challenges. We all have successes, we all have failures. Is there anything that you do differently or that you had to rethink in terms of how you write or communicate or how you report facts? If you have any reflections on that, that would be very helpful to know.
So my main reflection is that I love like visiting schools and then write about what they are doing. There are always great stories, and I work so much with the charter schools here that I still know a lot of charter leaders, and so they call me. They're like, "Oh, I'm doing this. It's great." There's not so much appetite for these things to be published. Sometimes when I'm pitching, like it's like these granular stories. There's not so much. I think there's not so much space to it. And
because it's a charter school, or because it's granular, or about promising programs?
I think it's because granular, right? It might be hard to replicate, and so even if you have like a great story, right, it's very hard to replicate. I have seen a lot of more on the negative stories. Parents will call me and tell me, "You can't believe this happened in my school." And I'm like, "Great, okay. Do you want me to put you in touch with a journalist?" "Oh, no, please, no, I would never speak in public." That is such a challenge, right? I really think that what you see in the newspapers is like the tip of the iceberg, because the vast majority of parents, they won't even complain to the principal, They are outraged by what's happening, but they will not talk to anybody who actually has like potential to make changes. People are very reluctant.
And why are they so reluctant to? They're complaining. They want to complain, but they don't want to. Why is that?
I mean, I understand this. I'm not going to complain about every single thing in my kids, school. Like, I am happy. Overall, I'm happy, right? I have complained only for things that are like really cross the threshold. I'm like, okay, now I need to speak up. But I think that there is this tension about, you don't want to piss off the school where your kids are, you don't want to be that annoying parent. But at the same, particularly in private schools here, I think there is like so much more discontent than people are expressing, also because they are afraid, right? Will then not accept the sibling, or, they're not going to help with placement. But then even in public schools, people sometimes I have seen like they will change their kids, the kids' school, but they will not talk to the principal and complain. Amazing. So I think there's a real reluctance like on the parent side to complaints. But I feel like now there's a lot of people who call me. Sometimes I'm like, I don't represent your district. Like I serve on the CC for District 2 here. It's Manhattan. I'm like, you are in Queens. Like, there's literally nothing that I can do for you. I can put you in touch with somebody who serves in your school board. But I think sometimes people just want to vent and like say like, this is not right. I don't think it's right what is happening in my school. If there is, and I have had this experience, if there is a very violent incident, they're going to sue the district, and they're not going to say one word. The worst case of violence in New York City, just go through the courts. The lawyers immediately tell them, do not talk to any journalist of anybody, because then you're not going to be able to negotiate a good settlement.
You mentioned that sometimes you hear stories that seem like good stories. You pitch them. Can you tell us about a story that you thought was a good story that no one seemed to want? Or just tell us what it was about. What was the topic?
Yes. Well, I'm still gonna find a way to place this one, and I haven't written yet, but it's on my list. There is one particular charter school in Queens here, Forte Prep, that has done such a great job serving students with disabilities that, like, the students with disabilities who moved there, those families then kind of went back to all the families in their public school and said, like, you have no idea what they are doing for my kid here. And they just then like moved as a block And so you have like tons of these families who were not being served at the public schools and moved to this charter school and are really happy now. And I'm really hoping to go visit that school. I have visited many years ago, but I really hope that I'll go and tell that story, because charter schools usually get such a bad rap about not serving students with disabilities. And not only you have some charter schools here that were specially designed to serve students with disabilities, Bridge Prep in Staten Island for students with dyslexia and language based. I mean, you have the New York City charter autism school. You have many schools like this, but also schools that are not, but are doing a very good job. And we see now in the numbers that charters have really increased the numbers of students with disability that are being served now.
What about the magazines I think of when I think of New York City? I think of all these magazines that could be publishing more about schools. New York Magazine, The City, Hellgate, Gothamist. Do you pitch them, the New York Times Magazine, do you pitch them? How do they respond to your pieces? Do they respond at all? Do they want you to be in the opinion section instead of in the news section? Do they not want stories that are about charter schools? What's your experience with the other outlets in New York City?
I have not pitched them. Maybe I should. I have written for a reason recently about the platform that our new mayor had. What he said during the campaign around education, and they were very generous. It was a long article, but I have not pitched so much to these other magazines. I mean, as I said, I am still a mother for half of my time, and that's how I want it to be for the next few years. I still have a little one, and until he can kind of navigate the subway by himself, I'm still going to be with him there. And I think the City Journal and the MI are keeping me very busy these days.
Okay.
But yes, there's definitely, and I'm constantly like giving to friends, journalists, like, you should write about this. I don't have time, but you should definitely, somebody who has
There's only so
time.
much you can do. The one obvious place I can think of, and this is not necessarily for you to do, but it's an obvious hole. New York Magazine, until recently, had a writer, Jonathan Chait. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, Chait. He wrote frequently about education issues and city politics. He moved to the Atlantic, but that's a magazine that has a history of writing about New York City schools, New York Magazine. And
Yes.
this is such an important time, not only because of choice, but also because we've got a new mayor here and an upcoming midterms and an election. I want there to be more of you or other journalists writing about schools in New York City.
Yes. Here's one idea that I think would really fit these magazines. I mean, how the African American community has abandoned New York City public schools. There are now more Asian students than African American students in New York City public schools. It's really dramatic, the decrease in the number of African American students in New York City public schools over the last 20 years. I think that is a story to tell. And if you have the context, and you go and interview these families, and
they've left the city, or they've gone to charters or homeschool.
So I think both, but mostly they have left the public schools, right? Because charter schools are 90% of students are either Black or Hispanics. Yeah. And so a lot of them left for charter schools. And I think that, and some of these school districts in Brooklyn, for example, now have less than 4,000 students, District 16, for example. And so I think that is such a story to tell that could have so much color, right? So much texture with stories, and how people who have been here like for generations, and they have probably gone to the same schools. And I know some of these families, like their kid is now at a charter school, and they tell me like, look, my grandmother went there, she did not get a good education. My mother went there, I went there, and I didn't get a good education. My kid is on a different trajectory.
That's a fascinating story. I know you don't have time, but I hope that you write it. I would be happy to read it.
Yep.
I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences, what you're writing about, what you're seeing, what you're thinking. It's very, very helpful. And I look forward to seeing your stories in the future. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.